Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us here on the Inside Scoop. I am Alpha Woolen, and I'll be your host for this evening. Tonight, we have with us Christopher Topoleski, who is the Executive Director of Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions. Christopher, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me here this evening.
Sure. Really excited to talk about this. Environmental justice and environmentalism is an issue that's on the minds of many Americans these days, especially because of the kind of change in the approach to environmental policy because of the new administration. So really excited to have this conversation.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to spending time with you and talk a bit about what we're doing, where we came from, and kind of what the future holds for the work here in Northern Virginia.
Sure. So how did Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions form?
Yeah, so FACS, as we call ourselves,
Okay,
started about in 2013 as a discussion group in the church basement. It was an interfaith group. There was a call out just where people interested in talking about this. And lo and behold, I think it was something like 80 folks showed up to start talking about it across different faiths. 3 years later, 2016, they filed for become incorporated in the state of Virginia and Commonwealth, and we have been a 501c3 for this is our 10th year.
So this is a combination of different faith communities coming together to agree on or work on climate.
Yeah, so it is about faith communities, but we've heard you stumbled over a bit of our name. It's a mouthful, Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions,
Right.
But we're referring really to ourselves as FACS, and that's how we're kind of branding ourselves and talking with folks, because we know that a third of the folks who are involved with us, who volunteer with us, who receive our materials, who come out and talk to us, they're not part of a faith community, but they're just as passionate about the issues. And so for us, it is not exclusive. Yes, it was born out of that, and we'll always carry, our niches with that moral imperative. But for us, we welcome everyone to the table, whether you're part of a faith community or not.
Have you found that it's been a challenge bringing people of different faiths together?
There are so many different issues,
Yeah.
that are affecting different faith communities, and some, kind of distinct to that faith community. But I think for us, environmental issues, we can make that moral argument. So I think for now, for example, we are making an effort to reach out to some of the maybe less traditional and some of the more inclusive, right? For example, we just brought onto our board of directors someone who was very interested and came to us and said, I have a lot of interest in bringing the Hindu faith to the table. And we're like, that's great. And so that is his charge, as he has said, I want to spend the next year just doing outreach to my friends, my family, my faith community to bring more people to the table.
Absolutely. I don't think it matters, who you believe or what you believe in if you want clean water and clean air.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we found, regardless of who we're talking to, when we're speaking with faith leaders, is that Earth really is a common theme and a common trend, or a common theme in all of the different faith traditions. So
Sure.
for us, whether it's looking at Bible, Quran, whatever it is, the Earth is there, and so that really resonates with a lot of people. Whether you want to call it, your green sanctuaries, green communities, and things like that, we have folks that are just interested in it.
Fantastic. So FACS is based in Northern Virginia.
Correct. So we are in what we call our advocacy hubs. We're in Fairfax County, City of Alexandria, Arlington, Loudoun County, and also we're out in Rockingham as well in the city of Harrisonburg.
So what does environmentalism or faith action look like in Northern Virginia?
So traditionally for FACS, and for the first, I'd say, 8 or 9 years of its history, it was about being activists. It was advocacy at the local level with both school boards, and our local elected officials, the supervisors, the city council. That was traditionally what it was. And it started out really helping them to develop what an environmental plan looks like. We were very, very much involved in Fairfax County's environmental plan development and then finally publishing. And in the past couple of years have worked with the City of Alexandria and Arlington County to help develop theirs as well. So that's really what it started as. And now in the last few years, we've kind of shifted into, that's very important still, but we also offer programming. So for a faith community that wants to take the action of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, increasing their energy efficiency, saving money, putting more of that money back into their mission, whether it's outreach into the community with a food pantry and that, we launched what we call our Power of Faith, which helps those faith communities kind of make those changes at their kind of base level.
What are some of the regional needs that you've noticed when it comes to like environmental or environmentalism?
I think there's some things that we'll probably touch on a bit here. It's things like the heat island effects that have been, kind of impacting us over the years. We've seen climate change, just for folks that have lived in the region 20, 30 years, we're seeing that. And we're seeing more hotter days, more heat emergencies. We're seeing that kind of thing. We're also looking at issues of, like we talk about, greenhouse gas emissions and how they may be affecting our environment, our air, our water. But again, it's a lot of those things that are impacting us from day to day, and we'll talk about some of these later, our utility bills. How we're starting to see some of these things. Down to our waste. We have a whole team that works on waste recycling, things like that as well. One of those policies was passed a few years ago in the General Assembly, and it was to reduce or actually eliminate styrofoam carryout containers. That went into effect a year ago in July, and fully into effect with all places, all food service this summer. So those are the kinds of things that we can do at the local level, and that we've been doing it. But a lot of it has to do with, can we green some of our local, like our schools? Can we green them more than we're doing?
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting point. I'm sure there are some areas where, or some points where you're just like, there's some areas of environmental injustice that might not be as obvious.
Right.
For example, when you go to the grocery store, we were talking about Wegmans earlier, like the grocery stores that we like to go to.
Right.
And you have to pay 5 cents now for a plastic bag or a paper bag. But when we bring our own bags, that can help us kind of reduce our footprint.
Right.
So are there other and obvious areas that people, like when you work with them, they didn't realize, oh my gosh, that is affecting my environment?
Well, so I think, some of them can be a little bit, I would say, like a little wonky. Like as you look around your house, are you doing things like with your electricity? Or if you're in your buildings, your faith community, are you looking at LED bulbs? Are you looking at smart thermostats? Those simple, small things. But I think we see, when we see it, is the obvious, what you just talked about. When you go to a grocery store, and you're now seeing there you're being charged for a paper bag. And we just found this out the other day ourselves, right? But again, it's still a resource, right? The plastic bag tax was put in for a reason.
Right.
And it caused many of us to carry those bags in every day.
Right.
Although there are times we go, you know what, I don't have the bag with me, I'll just go in and get the paper bag. And in the back of your mind, and I don't pay for it, but, you will need to.
Yeah.
And then there's those questions about what happens when you do get those bags, when you do have those plastic bags. We all end up with them some way or another, right? And we did a study last year that said, okay, what do we do with these plastic bags? And we all kind of bring them to the store, we toss them in the bin, and we think that they're going to go somewhere. And we actually found out last year that recycling works. When you're bringing them to the different various stores around that have those collections, you are actually making a difference. So you may have to take those bags, but when you recycle them, they're actually going where they're supposed to go. And it's one of the easier things we can do.
I think it's so interesting how we move about in our daily lives and just thinking that the decisions that we make only affect our lives. But on your website, on the FACTS website, it mentions the Urban Heat Mapping Project. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so very excited about that. So earlier this year, we talked with the Virginia Climate Center at George Mason University and said, can we start this project together? We started talking about the question came from, what can you do in urban environments about heat islands? And heat islands are due to things like lack of tree canopy, a lot of paved surface. And the head of the center said to us, trees are the biggest thing. Okay, so we started talking about what could we do to identify this. The Fairfax County, for example, and the whole region has done a lot of research on this over time. There are heat maps that have been developed. For example, with Fairfax County, they've used satellite imaging over a period of 7 years between 2013 and 2020 to identify different areas of heat. There's a lot of information that's there. What we determined was we could do a project to add more into that. And the niche there is that we were going to be identifying routes to go travel and collect data kind of in real time at what we consider the ambient. So basically where you and I are breathing, what's affecting us. And so that is a project that we started. And we did Measurement Day back in, I think it was July 16th, where we had 30 different routes. We had 80 volunteers at preset times throughout the day doing these routes that were, computer derived from George Mason. And we sent everyone out with a unified, device to go collect data. Now those data are going to go to George Mason. They're going to look at those. They're going to analyze it. We're going to have a report later this year. And we're hoping that the results of that report will be used going into 2027 to talk about, with decision makers, public and private, what can they do to reduce the heat island effect in this area.
So so you are going to be collecting data between July and like December?
So we collected it all on one day, July 16th.
Wow.
One of the hottest days. We had certain criteria. So when we heard on July 10th, 16th will be the go day, there was a big scramble. But we had everyone in place to do that day. So all the data, so it's basically 30 routes, 3 collection points throughout the day during these times. All of those data will now be analyzed to kind of have the best kind of uniform variable as we can.
Is this something just happening in Fairfax County, or is this a model from like another state?
So there's been more actually done in this in Europe than here in the United States, but we know that Richmond, for example, did something similar in an urban environment recently. So it is something that is definitely being done, and so we're excited to be a part of that.
Yeah. Do you notice that there are certain communities? I mean, I'm sure the assumption is probably, or the answer is yes, but obviously there are certain communities that feel the impact of a lack of a tree canopy than other communities.
Yes, and so when we designed and looked at the routes, we were looking at them as, well, let's not just pick certain routes that will kind of fit that model. We wanted to look at routes that were representative of the whole Northern Virginia urban, more tree canopy, et cetera. But for sure, we went down and looked at areas like Bailey Crossroads or Colmore, as that is one of those areas that we have identified and has been identified as having a higher heat island effect than others. We want to look really, though, at the differences from kind of one block to another block, for example. When you see the data that are out there, they're not as granular as that. They're either done by satellite or they're done from weather station to weather station. We're actually kind of going real time, neighborhood to neighborhood, street by street in these areas to show that it really does matter a half a mile apart, the variation in the temperature.
And I'm glad you mentioned that. Why is that? Why do you think that there can be an experience with heat in one community and like a mile down the road it's different?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it has kind of two things to look at. One is clearly the tree canopy, right? Shaded areas are going to be cooler. But then we're also looking at areas where there may be, less of overhangs and coverings of parking lots and things like that as well.
Interesting. So please make sure you don't go anywhere as we continue our conversation with Christopher Topoleski, who's the Executive Director of Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions. Stay right there, watch these PSAs. We'll be right back in a few seconds.
Every day across America, excess food is gathered by a network of good people at local food banks, giving hope to millions of children who struggle with hunger. They've earned their wings, and you can too. Together, we can solve child hunger. Support Feeding America and your local food bank at feedingamerica.org.
Hi, I'm Josh Temple. You might have seen me on TV where I help folks turn their houses into dream homes. But forget construction. Parenting is the toughest job there is. So when you need help or advice, turn to the parenting experts at Boys Town.
I was afraid of that.
Well, guess it's time to get you fixed.
Your pets will start fooling around sooner than you think.
Go on, get out of here!
Accidental litters lead to millions killed in shelters each year. Help prevent more. Fix at month 4.
Food. It nourishes, brings us together, and adds flavor to life. That's why it's important to wash hands, surfaces, and fresh produce. Keep raw meat, poultry, and seafood separate from ready-to-eat foods like fruits and vegetables. And cook to proper temperatures using a food thermometer. Enjoy, and refrigerate leftovers within 2 hours. For more tips on safely preparing foods, visit homefoodsafety.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Thank you so much for joining us back here on the Inside Scoop. Again, I'm Alpha Woolen, your host for this evening. We are going to continue our conversation with Christopher Topoleski, the Executive Director of Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions. So Christopher, when we left off, we were talking about the FACS's project about heat mapping, and we were talking about why certain communities experience the effects of heat more so than others. Right. And you are collecting this data. You started in July.
Correct.
And one day, and you're going to send this information to George Mason.
Right.
But once you have this data, what happens?
So I think what's important to note is that this is a project that created a lot of interest in the community. When we kind of said we have a call to action about this, we need volunteers. And we talked with our partner organizations. A lot of them put up the call as well. We had 110 people who said, I don't know what day it's going to be. You can't tell me what day it's going to be, but I want to do it. And like I said earlier, we had 80 of those folks that were able to participate that day with 5 days notice. So I mean, there's a lot of interest in this, and there's a lot of interest too from people who are interested in trees, right? There's a lot of people who are interested in kind of cooling technologies and all these different solutions. So for us, it's very exciting, right? We got we had government staff doing the runs with us that day, which was kind of cool. Yeah. We had board members in Arlington out there doing the runs as well, who came back and said, really love doing it. So there's definitely the recognition that this is an issue. Yeah. And so what we want to do is once George Mason starts, doing all the science, right, and they science it, we're going to be starting to look at it. And I think our first preview will be this fall in October. So every year, FACS has a climate crisis forum that picks kind of a topic of interest. Last year it was on data centers, which I think we're going to talk about. But this year we decided that we wanted to talk about heat islands. So it wasn't to say we know what the results of this study are going to be, but we wanted to bring people to the table. So we see it as an opportunity for folks who may not really be familiar with it to come and learn in our first panel about what are the impacts of heat islands, what are they, and what are the impacts on health in our communities. And then in our second panel, we're discussing things, possible solutions. What can be done about it? And that's where I think we'll be able to start, kind of having that conversation. It's not just necessarily plant more trees, right? That's one of the solutions potentially. And there's other things that I was mentioning on our way out on the last segment, which is, cooling roof technologies or, reflective surfaces and things and stuff I don't even know about yet. That's the great thing is we're going to have people coming to the table saying, here's what we're doing in our community. But there also needs to be the carry through, right? So we can start planting trees and we can bring all these people out to go and volunteer and plant the trees, especially in areas that we may identify, which may be underserved areas. But if nobody takes care of the trees after that, if we're not out there to go back and say, then what did we really do? Was it good policy if we're either not following through or not saying to the community, now this is something that we can partner on together?
Do you think that people understand the impact of heat? It goes beyond just being comfortable in a space. Like, how does heat affect an individual?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. It definitely has, some definite health effects, especially for those that might be with a medical condition. I mean, 2 years ago, in the summer of 2024, Fairfax County came to us and other partners and said, we know that there is this mobile home community in Fairfax County, which to me, there was news. There's mobile home communities in Fairfax County. Wait, think of this county. We see ourselves as being one of the most affluent. But this is a community where these mobile homes did not have air conditioning units, right? And so, it was identified that, within 48 hours, we put a call out and our members, our supporters, bought the air conditioning units, right? For that we thought, we would need and was told us these are the ones you're going to need. But then another partner, Rebuilding Together, installed them, right? But there had to be also that discussion and that conversation with them from the county as well. Can you afford to run these units? And if not, here are the assistance programs. So I think it's kind of holistic, right? You can't just say, we provided something. Is it going to be a meaningful benefit? But there were folks in there that fell through the cracks. There were toddlers and there were elderly people that just did not meet the criteria for the energy assistance program, but they felt the heat, nonetheless.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that, right? There's people who are out there working every day doing all the outdoor work that are in that kind of temperatures every day.
That's right. And I think it's important to point out that when you're overheated, it affects your mental health, it affects your cognitive abilities, it affects a child's ability to concentrate, it affects how you regulate your emotions So it's really important that we that we ensure that our neighbors are in a cool environment.
Right, and I think this the answer of let's add more cooling stations isn't going to be an answer, because if there's not a reason to go to them, you're not going to go to them, right? If you look and you see what are considered cooling stations, something like a library brings more people in than just a standalone place that has air conditioning in it. So that's why we start talking about, like, what do resilience hubs look like? We were thinking in the past that resilience hubs were just there for natural disasters. Well, you know, extreme heat is now becoming the norm in the summer.
Right.
Yeah.
So speaking of heat and environmental factors, we can't talk about environmentalism in Virginia without talking about data centers.
Data centers. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So, I mean, so just to preface this, when I started at the end of 2023, we were discussing these data centers, and we need to get in on this. We need a policy on data centers, and it pretty quickly to us that you can't have a policy on it. Is so nuanced. So we as an organization kind of early on in the region started coming in with what we called our principles of data center reform or data center growth. And these are in FAQs. And we were wrong on some of the FAQs, you know, at first. We've gone back and we've looked at it as we've learned more information as well. So yeah, it's there's a lot with data centers, you know, in Northern Virginia.
Absolutely, and I think it's so important that you said that initially we had it wrong. And I think that's such an important stance to take, because it is such a rapidly developing industry.
Right.
And it's okay to say, you know what, we got this wrong, or we had this perspective, and literally tomorrow there's something different. So now that you all have had some time to take a look at the industry and what are some of your major concerns? Yeah,
so I think in general our principles haven't changed. We've added, we've massaged them a little bit, but I think for us, I mean, to be realistic, the reality is that data centers are not going to go anywhere, that there will be growth in data centers. Now, should there be a pause potentially to identify, to look at the long-term growth and how that may impact the region? Yeah. So, I mean, for us though, I think that where we stand on this is that any growth in data centers needs to be done in a environmentally sustainable and responsible way, and should not undermine the goals of the Virginia Clean Economy Act, which says that the two major utility companies in Virginia are 100% fossil free by 2045 and 2050. And without benchmarks, you don't want to get to 2044 and people go, oops. So I mean, for us, it is about going through this in ways that are not just about that, but also how they are impacting the neighborhoods that they're up against. They're not just out there in the middle of nowhere, right? And there's some that are, hundreds of yards away from folks, but there are those that are not. And one of our founders who had moved to Ashby Ponds, which is a retirement community in Loudoun County, said that literally she got there and what's that humming? And on the other side of their retirement community was a data center. So not knowing they were in what's called Data Center Alley, it was for them. So I think that's for us. There's a lot about transparency. It's about full information from the data center industry, and also from our local governments when they're having conversations with them as well.
Absolutely, and I agree. It's not so. I do not think it's realistic to say that don't build any more data centers. We had a guest on the show recently that said, if you're watching this show on YouTube, it's going through a data center. If you have a cell phone and you Googled something, it's going through a data center. Data is a physical thing. I was talking to someone a few years ago, and they said maybe one of the worst things that we could have done was to use the word cloud to talk about data, because it gives you the idea that it's not a real physical thing. So it has to be housed somewhere. But so do you think that within facts, the idea is not so much that data centers need to stop existing, but there should be more regulatory policy?
Yeah, I mean, I think, looking at it, it was difficult in each of the recent General Assemblies, and in Virginia, this 2026, there was many, many data center bills, and one that we supported kind of made it through, and it was signed into law, and that deals with data center transparency and gives local governments authority to require certain studies. I mean, you would think that, there's one on noise, that's a required one, but other studies about water usage, land, you would think that these would be already in place, but they're not. And so that's the kind of thing, like understanding what the impact of these are in the community and having those discussions before, you see just as a revenue maker for local government, for example.
So you wouldn't say that as an environmentalist or an environmentalist organization that you're not anti-data center?
So we're not anti-data center, but we are pro-sustainable growth.
So what would you say to a resident that, for example, I think there's an application that's coming to the Mason district, and there are some folks, rightfully so, really concerned, like you just mentioned, the person who said, hey, what's that humming? And they didn't know that they were in Data Center Alley. But we also just said that data centers are a part of not only the lives of Virginians and U.S. citizens, literally the world. So what would you say to someone as far as something that would guide having an informed perspective regarding their role?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is to have their voice known, right? It is to say, you know, to not, and I think this is like kind of endemic to it, they're finding out after the fact, right? They're finding out, oh, this is coming to my neighborhood. Why are they not knowing about it before? Why is it not something that their local elected officials are saying to them and engaging with them on that discussion to say, am I making the right decision as an elected person to do this? So, I mean, for them, it's to bring in and say, look, these are the things that, while this data center may have gotten grandfathered in before this law was passed, I want you to treat them like they were not, and have them do these impact assessment studies, because it's a real thing, and, you know, and it's happening in other counties. We don't have a official volunteer hub in Prince William County, but they've been very successful, for example, in Prince William, about striking down, like most recently, the Digital Gateway. And it's a grassroots effort. It is community groups that are working very hard, HOAs, neighborhood associations, that are turning the supervisors and their local officials to say, no, we're not going to do this, and vote against it. So, I mean, that's a powerful message out there.
So when you say that you don't have a hub in Prince William County, what's been the blocker there, or just lack of opportunity?
Yeah, no, so I think, you know, the one thing that's really important to facts is that when we're working with residents in a community, we don't tell them what's best for them and what they should do, right? So for us, it's that we want our hubs, which are our volunteers, to be led by someone in the community. And we really need strong leadership. Like, for example, in our Arlington hub, we have a fantastic hub leader, Julie Rosenberg, who is leading that hub. And
shout out to Julie.
Yeah, so Julie is fantastic. But she's a volunteer. I mean, that is what she does. She's not a staff member, but she does this because this is what she's done. She retired. She had a career in it. She's retired. She loves doing this. She has great relationships with the elected officials in Arlington. So we need folks like that in Prince William, folks that are willing to carry it and be hub leaders.
Precisely. Thank you so much, Christopher. So again, we are going to continue our conversation with Mr. Topoleski of Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions. So stay right there, watch these 2 minutes of PSAs, and we will see you back in 3, 2, 1 more second.
Hi. Hoping for a crisp breeze to help keep you alert. Oh, he took a sip of water too. That'll probably help. You were probably gonna turn down the radio too, so you could focus, right?
Probably okay isn't okay.
Right?
If you see a warning sign, stop and call a cab, a car, or a friend.
I think the water line is what really drove it home. I blew on him.
What's wrong with the world, mama? People living like they ain't got no mamas. I think the whole world's addicted to the drama, only attracted to things that'll bring the trauma. Yeah, madness is what you demonstrate, and that's exactly how anger works and operates. Man, you gotta have love just to set it straight. Take control of your mind and meditate. Let your soul gravitate to the love, y'all.
People killing, people dying, children hurt and you hear them crying. When you practice what you preach, but you turn the other
Ma'am,
cheek.
you forgot your purse.
Oh, you don't know how worried I was. Thank you very much.
Hey.
Honesty. Pass it on.
Nice move, kid. Donut?
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
When I was your age, I was just like you, fascinated by stars. But now I get to search for life in the universe. And who knows, maybe life is looking for us too.
So we're like aliens to them?
Yeah. Does anyone want to be a scientist now?
I do.
Awesome. We need more girls in STEM.
Maybe we can find aliens.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Thank you so much for joining us back here on the Inside Scoop. We are going to continue our conversation with the Executive Director of Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions, Mr. Chris Topoleski. So when we ended the previous segment, we were talking about the all-encompassing topic of data centers. Right. And so I agree with you that data centers are a part of our lives, but just from a regulatory policy perspective, there needs to be more conversation and more done in that area. But specifically as it relates to environmental injustice, everyone has heard about data centers, and perhaps some folks know about tree canopies, as you talked about before. Maybe some folks don't. But how would you talk about environmental justice in practical terms?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the concept that everyone has a right to the same clean water, clean air, clean land, but also the same costs for their utilities, for example, that that you should be paying what you're using. And when you talk about with data centers, you shouldn't necessarily be subsidizing all of these data centers, especially those who are paying probably a larger share of their disposable income to their costs. So I mean, for us, like we talk about the Heat Island and mapping initiative, and it's identifying for us areas where we're going to see environmental justice issues. We have gone and worked in small areas with our partners. For example, in Arlington, we went into a community where Drew Elementary is and said, what kind of trees should we help with this? We can line up tree donations, we can line up volunteers. What can we do? And they said, we want an orchard on this community center. And for us, that was like, wow, okay, so now the idea wasn't that the orchard is going to provide all the food for the neighbor, but it's the idea that food security is also an environmental justice issue, that disability rights is an environmental justice issue. We had folks in that mobile home community I mentioned earlier that were disabled and were homebound and could not leave their homes. So there was no choice for them to go to a cooling center. So for us, it is, it encompasses, it's not just about folks we may not see in the mobile home community. It's about folks who are, maybe taking public transportation, who are sitting on diesel buses, who are breathing in the fumes, who are in communities where those buses run through. That for us is environmental, that everyone it's equitable.
So Dumfries, Virginia, and the reason I know this is because I spent some of my childhood there, is currently what I would consider a food desert. They haven't had a good grocery store for at least 20 years. So you just talked about having an orchard. How would an elected official work with facts to say, hey, what can we do to get an orchard here? What can we do to help this community?
Yeah, I mean, so for us, part of it is, if there are public lands where that is an option, that is great. Like, we would certainly talk with them, but I think it's also really important to go back to a lot of what kind of our niche, as I mentioned earlier, our advantage. We can bring in faith communities that might be in those areas, right? Faith communities are there, and we know of at least some nearby that have a community garden that have been put together. They have these grounds, and they're doing it. There may be options for the faith community to apply and receive grant for trees that can be planted as an orchard. But I think it's also important to know that, right, the faith communities should be involved, and they certainly are. Like, we see it a lot. We have, for example, Fairfax County has an office, that brings in faith and has that's part of what's in there. And so for us, I think that local officials should absolutely look to their faith communities as well as part of the solution.
Absolutely. Going back to the practical perspective when it comes to environmental justice or environmental injustice, what do you think there's some things that someone could do by themselves? Like, hey, I have this much acreage in my community. Like, what can I do as an individual?
So I think, that's a question more about, are you a good steward to your neighbors? But there's also the question about, what can I do when I'm seeing my bills every day? Me as the end user, right? And so I think that for us, I mentioned earlier this Power of Faith program that we named. It was actually came from a Department of Energy grant back in 2023. And it was to help us identify, like I mentioned, helping faith communities make themselves more energy efficient. We were expecting that to be a continuing project. We were expecting a second phase, change in administration, change in priorities. We are not, that money we are still in review for that, a year and a half later. we don't expect that those monies will come. However, in doing that and engaging with our faith communities, we learned from their congregants and their neighbors that they're like, hey, well, I'm facing these problems. So we don't have a name for it. We don't have a new program offering. We keep calling it the second version, or Power of Faith version 2. But we're going out and having these, these conversations in the faith communities. Is called them energy expos, where folks are learning about things, whether you're an owner of the property or whether you're a renter. What is it that you can do to lower your utility bill while increasing your comfort? And so for us, it's things like just simple things that are DIY, do it yourself, DIY. So you can do some weatherization in your home. You can do some other things like, reducing your water usage or installing, low flow, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the kinds of things we're trying to go out and help people and talk with them. But if there are people interested in, like serving their community, we're certainly happy to help them find a place with us.
You just mentioned the administration, so looking at things from a policy perspective, even drilling down to the local level. In your research, do you think there's some intentionality behind zoning and transportation that impacts certain communities?
So I will go to, we are a state and local organization, and that's what we focus on. So we focus on policy and engagement at the local level and the state level. However, to your question, there has been, and we've seen this, our partners are not just environmental groups. We work with a lot of organizations, including housing. And one of the housing groups that we spoke with in NAACP Fairfax came to us and said, hey, shall we start looking at all of the zoning and the land leases and all of it? Like, what were the laws on land back, not a million years ago? We're talking 50, 60 years ago. Who could own land in Fairfax County? And so for us, looking at that, there's absolutely, some of the systemic policies that have created where we are today in this. So, for us, that's a lot to deal with at the local level and at the state level. It keeps us busy, and it's going to continue to keep us busy. So for us, I think that, we've been fortunate, honestly, being in the Commonwealth, because we've been moving towards these environmental policies, regardless of what's been happening just a few miles away in DC. And that's where we continue to lean into is our local strength.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned what Fairfax NAACP asking you that question. Right. Hey, what happened 50, 60, 80 years ago that brought us here, which leads me to my next question about you all working with schools.
Yes.
It's so important that our current generation and even younger generations understand mistakes that were made, choices that were created from a policy perspective, governance, to make sure that we don't repeat that. So, in your own words, why do you think it's important, and what initiatives is FACTS taking to continue to work with our schools? Yeah, so I think with our schools, it's kind of twofold. We're working with school administrations, with the superintendents of the schools to talk about infrastructure, right? For lack of something better, like looking at putting solar on the schools, electric buses, and things like that. And we're having that conversation. Our climate crisis forum I mentioned to you earlier, 2 years ago, we held it about schools, and we brought in all of the leaders from the local schools. Most importantly, our first panel that night were students, and they were the students from the school systems in the area. So it wasn't asking them about what are your plans to go to electric buses. This is about what were you learning, what have you been doing? And honestly, we have seen a lot of students at the on the high school levels in Arlington, Loudoun County, and Fairfax, taking the initiative and creating their own kind of clubs to do this. Whether it's doing work that deals with local stream bed recovery, or it's about working with what we call fast fashion, or clothing recycling and clothing exchanges and things like they're doing in Arlington, or that's things like that, right? They're interested in this, right? So we may not get them really into like the engineering of environmental, energy efficiency, and they might not necessarily be here long enough as students, or at the point where before they're heading off to college, to really dig in on some of the environmental justice issues, but they're aware of it. And it's our hope that as they move forward in their careers, and I always ask somebody, what are you planning to go to school for? And most of the times when I'm talking to them at an environmental fair, or whether they're like, I'm going to go on this and study environmental science, or I want to go into this and my goal is environmental law. Good. I'll call me up in a couple years. So, for us, like now,
with our partnerships with George Mason, we're going to be working with them and a whole bunch of student honors class to develop, honestly, kind of what would it take to bring youth into an advocacy voice as we're pushing for more solar canopies and parking lots in the area.
I think when it comes to young people, we can't talk about this really important part of our population without talking about their access to information. There's so much data that's available to them, especially by way of social media. So if we know that they're ingesting this information and this data, especially through social media, we know that there's this politicization. Am I saying that right? There's politicization.
Yes. Yes.
So how do we address environmental policy without it contributing to a conversation about a culture war or making it about politics?
I mean, data don't lie, right? I mean, so that's the thing. At its essence, data don't lie. And if we're looking at this, we can start looking at, there is good news as well. We can look at it and say, a few years ago, we were expecting the planet to be warming by this fast, and it's actually come back a little bit. We've actually drew back a little bit how fast the planet is warming. However, it's not good enough. But we are saying, look, the data are there, and you especially see it in this area, right? And so that's why we're doing things like the heat mapping island project. We had students with their parents driving around, tangibly. They're seeing it. They're seeing the numbers in front of them on their monitor, on their smartphone, as the neighborhoods they're driving through. So it doesn't get any more, real than that.
Right.
So I think for us, it's that data don't lie, right? And so, but accept that, and I like to say this in previous roles I've had, know that you don't know. So be open to listening to the other arguments that are out there. Have there been, is there always been climate change in the world? Absolutely. But there's natural and there's man-made.
Right.
And so if you look at the actual data that do not lie, you will see that it has increased rapidly in the last 150 plus years. Yeah.
Would you find that more young people are concerned about tomorrow?
Oh, absolutely. And I think the importance is, though, for better or for worse, the folks who are doing a lot of advocacy right now on environmental policy are my age older, right? And so we want to bring in that next generation of advocates, but we also want to make sure that they're fully supported, right? These are generations who are coming out of college and worried about basic needs like rent. And so, it is about your basic human needs before the other issues. So I think it's about, getting there, but also not finding a cynical, future with them. So.
Absolutely. It is hard not to be cynical these days, but we have to keep moving forward. So please make sure you don't go anywhere. We are going to continue our conversation after these PSAs. We're going to continue our conversation with Chris Topoleski, the Executive Director of Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions.
Nice going, Spencer. I can't believe we broke Old Man Hennessy's window.
Correction, dude. You broke. I just threw the ball.
This is really bad. What are we gonna do?
We?
Go to the door, ask for the ball back. Are you serious? It's my ball, Myrtlebeck. You're so dead.
I'd run away.
Yeah, to Uruguay.
Kiss your life goodbye. Sorry.
Let's go. See you, dude. See ya. Remember me and your well.
Nice one. Some friends you are.
Keep smiling, keep shining.
Hi. Tell him it was an accident. And we can fix the window. Come on. I'll come with you.
Loyalty. Pass it on.
You go first.
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's a matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Awkward. I'm the awkward silence. You try to avoid me, then there I am again.
But an awkward silence can be a great thing.
Like Kelly here is about to demonstrate.
You haven't really been yourself lately. Are you okay?
Find out how you can help a friend with their mental health at seizetheawkward.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
And thank you so much for joining us back here on the Inside Scoop as we begin to close out our conversation with the Executive Director of Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions, Mr. Chris Topoleski. So when we left off, we were talking about just the importance of making sure that we're inviting our younger citizens and residents into the conversation. But we can't, again, I think it's important that we circle back to the political and the policy component of it. So what do you think is something specifically as it relates to Northern Virginia that our elected officials can kind of jump in and kind of get some easy wins, or what's the low-hanging fruit?
I mean, I think for us, for our elected officials, for our average folks, I think that, for our elected officials, it's looking at some of the policies that we've already looked at, and things like can we get into where we look at things like recycling, more kind of composting and waste and things like that. There's a lot of conversations about that. As we're talking about more things about like EVs, electric vehicles, and charging and things like that, there's a lot of areas for that as well for some more advocacy in the next General Assembly. We're actually going to be sitting down with our elected officials, a few months from now to say, kind of what's your advocacy agenda in Richmond come the next General Assembly. We also do that with our Northern Virginia delegates and state senators and say to them, kind of where can we help you? We do that with the governor's office. Where are our policies aligned, or where are we going to not be aligned? So I think that's one of those areas where we still kind of to be determined with some of the conversation. But I think what's really important is having folks have their voice at the table. You mentioned about young people. I think when we're talking about all these other issues like environmental justice issues, like the heat islands, it is important to have people from the community and their voice there as well, because you really can't have a meaningful conversation, a meaningful consultation about an issue if you're doing it, academically. Sure. For example, like with heat islands, we talked about these areas like Colmore and others. When we're planning our panels, when we're having our, like we talked about in our forum in the fall, when we're planning our discussion, we want somebody from that community, their voice there, right? As I mentioned, the folks out in Prince William, we had them at the table talking about their experience, what was happening in their neighborhood. Otherwise, we're going to do a disservice advocating on their behalf, right?
Sure. But so conversely, from a policy perspective, what sounds good as a good soundbite, but just really doesn't move the needle?
Yeah, I mean, I think anything that's not genuine, you can give talking points to a person, and if they're the same talking points, and I used to joke about this, I did a lot of work prior to coming to the local level and working with facts. All of my work was at the federal level, so I was doing all the national work for nonprofits. And the joke was always, we should get a postcard. That was 1 million of the same message being sent in. So we do send out action alerts, but when somebody's seeing the same language, it's pretty clear, this is not somebody's genuine story. And that's what it is, right? So for us, what actually gets a person's attention, an elected official's attention, a property owner's attention, is your story. And that's what advocacy is. It's telling your story. And so, when we do, and of course you obviously want to hold a meeting with a supervisor or a delegate, and it doesn't go, every which way. So you're like, hey, here are the main themes we'd like to talk about. Yeah. But it's critical that you say what this means to you. Tell us what it means when we're talking about you having to take public transportation, what it's like to be on the diesel bus, what it's like to be in a food island. What it's like, to live where there are no trees. You need to tell your story.
That's right. So 2027 is a big year. It's important. Well, in Virginia, we have elections every single year. Some people get annoyed by that. I love it because it keeps our civics wheels running.
Correct.
So what advice would you give someone who's running, as far as what we don't expect people to know everything, but what would you advise them to get spun up on, or at least what are some good questions to ask?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the main thing is bring the question up to your constituents. Like, what is it environment? Like, not is it, hey, what keeps you up at night? It's what can I do? Like, what's happening in your neighborhood environmentally? And you may not like the answer about data centers, for example, right? You may not like that answer. But just to be understand that, you know, the thing is that we've talked about a bunch of topics tonight, but they're certainly not all the topics. There are folks that are very passionate about waste, and there are people that are very passionate about our streams and our, you know, our local rivers. Like these folks need to have their voices heard at their elected officials, right? And so for them, I think it's, you know, conversely, it's you need to go out to your officials, anyone who's running, and saying these are the issues that are important to me, and then, you know, learning how to tell your story. So.
That's right. So to me, staying cool isn't a partisan issue. Drinking clean water isn't a partisan issue. So how do you find yourself as an organization, however? I mean, because, I mean, this is Washington, right? This is the DMV, and this is a policy-focused show.
Sure.
So how do you find yourselves interacting with folks on both sides or all sides of the aisle and making it nonpartisan?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really what it is that like climate change is I mean, it can be politicized, but again, I go back to this, you know, the data, but like everybody is affected by the heat wave on July 2nd and 3rd the same way. Everyone was affected by, you know, each of the different, we say the different jurisdictions here in Fairfax, everybody, we have to cancel our summer concert series because of heat. Whether it was in the Republican supervisor's district or in somebody else's district. Like, that is the thing. It's gonna affect everybody. So, I mean, for us, we want to have the conversation with both sides of it. And in fact, we are having a conversation, you know, we work with another organization that is very much aligned, you know, on the Republican side about the future of clean energy. And we're working with them, you know, we work with them with General Assembly because they're a state level organization. But we want to, you know, we have a common, we agree there are common things we can push policy for in terms of clean energy and renewables and things like that. And that's really what it is. You have to talk to both sides of the aisle. The environment's not going to say, oh, I'm going to affect you one way or the other. The environment doesn't care. So, I mean, I think that's really the message they get across.
One thing you've consistently said this evening, though, is the data don't lie. You got to trust the data. So what do you do when you have people that are in influential decisions or influential positions and they say, don't trust the data, don't trust the science, this is not what we're going to do?
I mean, I think you'll always have that. I think, you know, we're somewhat a bit luckier in the region we're in Northern Virginia because there are fewer of those people here about those issues than there are other places. But sure, we see that. I mean, we'll face that. And that's just where you need to have the stronger voice.
So what would you say, what do you say to your neighbors? What do you say to your neighbors when they're just like, hey, I'm looking at CNN, or, you know, I'm on Fox News and I know, Chris, that this is what you do, but I really, really trust this political pundit. Educate me.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's where I actually have, you mentioned, I actually had a neighbor who was, when I first mentioned, you know, the kind of things I did before I worked for Fax, he's like, you know, I don't, but eventually came around to, well, you're making a persuasive argument. Like, I have looked at this. But again, it comes down to you can't force someone to do an independent assessment of what they're reading. People are going to sometimes just want to seek out the sources that align with their predisposed position. And there are times when you're not going to change their mind. And so, you know, in policy world, you just work with the organizations that are like-minded to be stronger and get the policy through, and that is the reality.
Well, I'm so glad that you were on this show, and
thank you.
We are working with your organization. So what initiatives do you all, or some events that you all have coming up soon?
So I mentioned that we have our Climate Crisis Forum, which is going to be open to the public. I don't have the exact date yet, but we're looking at the end of October, and we're going to talk about these heat islands. We're not going to have the results of our study with George Mason yet, but we should have a bit of a preview of where those data are headed. We're going to hear from folks that are in positions that deal with the health effects of natural disasters and heat. And then from there, you know, there's always the different events that we'll be holding. We will put out newsletters. We put them out every month to the folks who subscribe. So if you visit our website, faithforclimate.org, you can see what we're all about, sign up to see what we're doing, and if you don't want to receive it, just enroll, unsubscribe. So, but we are, you know, we try to create a space that people can come to no matter where they fall in their political or ideological views.
And so the website is faithforclimate.org, and they can also find you on social media at Faith for Climate, which should be on the screen as well.
Yes, yes.
So Chris, thank you so much for joining us here on the Inside Scoop. We really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm going to be working with you in the community anyway, so I'm going to see you soon.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So as the school year begins, somewhere in America, a child, let's call him Braylon, is waking up in a neighborhood with few trees and little shade. During the hottest months of the year, temperatures in Braylon's community rise higher than in neighborhoods just a few miles away. To keep their home cool, Braylon's mother faces increasingly expensive electricity bills. To pay them, she takes on extra hours at work, which means less time at home, more exhaustion, and increased stress in their household. Every morning, Braylon walks to school along streets near a busy highway. So before he even reaches his classroom, he's been exposed to traffic noise and exhaust fumes from cars, trucks, and buses. By the time Braylon sits down at his desk, he is tired, distracted, and anxious, and he will struggle to concentrate despite his best efforts to learn. Seeing the impact of the environmental burdens her son carries, Braylon's mother desperately seeks improvement. So when she learns about a public hearing addressing some of these issues affecting her community, she considers attending. But the hearing is scheduled during her work hours. Missing work could mean falling behind on the electric bill, so she can't go. Although she and her son will live with the consequences of the decisions made during the public hearing, her voice will remain unheard. Tragically, Braylon's struggles will be blamed on his family, his culture, and even his race. But this situation is not the result of cultural or racial deficiency, parenting failure, nor a lack of ambition. This is what happens when environmental conditions, economic inequality, and political exclusion converge in the life of a child. This is environmental injustice. So now multiply that story times 10 million, which is the number of children living in these conditions in America today. Just something for you to think about. Thank you so much for joining us here on The Inside Scoop. We will see you next week.